Well, greetings and welcome today to the new book of Christian Martyrs with Dr. Jerry Pattengale. I can't thank Dr. Pattengale enough for his time today, as busy as he is, for agreeing to do this. But today's event is sponsored by Wesley Seminary as part of the Wesley Seminary Webinar Series in collaboration with Indiana Wesleyan University with the goal of resourcing the local church. Speaking of Wesley Seminary, I have to say that if you're thinking about seminary, you feel like God's putting it on your heart, we would love to talk to you about that, answer any questions that you might have. Give us a call, 877-673-0009, or shoot us an email at wesley@endwest.edu. Speaking of questions, I hope you will have questions during today's presentation, and today will be a little different format. This will be an interview style. I'll ask Jerry questions and allow him to share just his rich experiences with us. And I hope that you will have questions as well. If you do, please submit those in the Q&A forum or send me it via chat at the bottom of your screen. And Jerry has graciously agreed to answer as many questions as time allows today. We will go right at an hour, so please submit those questions early if you have those. So today's guest is Dr. Jerry Pattengale. Dr. Pattengale serves as the university professor at Indiana Wesleyan University. He was also is one of the 2 founding scholars and among 3 founding leaders of the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and he has served in executive leadership during most of its existence. Dr. Pattengale has been honored as Outstanding Faculty Member of the Year twice and Honors Professor of the Year at Azusa Pacific University. Indiana Wesleyan University's faculty also honored him with the World Changing Faculty Award and the 2021 World Changing Alumnus Award. I could go on and on with Jerry's accomplishments, but these are mind-staggering. He has attended meetings at the White House on faith-based initiatives. He's co-hosted events in the British Library in England. He's hosted panels and speaker series at the Vatican and at St. Mark's Cathedral in Cuba. Dr. Pattengale has also authored or edited over 40 books, including the new book of Christian Martyrs, and he co-authored the 2021 award-winning TV series Inexplicable: The Spread of Christianity to the Ends of the Earth. Dr. Pattengale earned his PhD and MA at Miami University, his MA at Wheaton Graduate School, his BS at Marian College, now Indiana Wesleyan University. And an interesting footnote, Dr. Pattengale, you were 16 years old and homeless when you graduated from Harrison High School near Lafayette, Indiana. My distinct honor to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Jerry Pattengale. Thank you, sir. How are you?
I'm really well, especially after writing a book like this. So just excited to be here. And you read that introduction. I will tell you, the last 20 or 30 years of my career has been involved in working with people like you, Joel, that are just so gifted, and people around you at Wesley Seminary. I remember being at the dedication of the building. The Green family from Hobby Lobby was there. They'd helped to build the building, and people were signing scriptures on those beams. And before this presentation, I actually drove out to the seminary, sat there in the beautiful atrium for a bit, ate a Wendy's sandwich, just trying to get my mind. All these, I'll be honest with you, I enjoyed the book launches, and God's been very gracious. I feel like I'm a mediocre writer that for whatever reason, like David, he's anointed for these projects. And but this particular book launch is a little different. It's not an easy book to talk about in some ways. And I told the publisher that my co-author, who's half my age, and some of you know Johnny Moore, he's won the Simon Wiesenthal Award, and he's the one who flew the planes into Lebanon, who raised the funds to rescue the persecuted under the Taliban coming out of Iraq and other countries. Goodness. I told them, I said, I have a face for radio and a voice for writing. You can give him all of the broadcast. He's been on TV, he's been everywhere on this book, and it's given me freedom to actually get ready for another book project. But anyway, it's an honor to be here, and I can't take all of these, but I really looked forward to this one and to all you associated with the seminary.
Well, thank you so much. And I got to tell you, wow, what an incredible book. Now, I've got to ask you, see if I've got my numbers right here. You worked on this for 7 years. Is that correct? 7 years?
It's 7 years. Johnny Moore and I
Okay.
went to broadcast yesterday or day before, and he said at least 7 years. And I guess an asterisk would be, you prepared for it for a lifetime, and the contract was 7 years ago. So this is the kind of book that, for those of us have followed Christian history, whether you have degrees or not, it's really a lifetime journey, because there's certain stories that surface that you just know about. So yeah, it's been 7 years.
So 7 years on that. Now, if I'm wrong, please correct me here. In that time, while you were working on this book, this amazing project, you had 10 other books published, as well as a 6-hour film series while you were working on this book. How did this win, and how did this begin, and how did you produce the other books? And
well, just around the corner behind me here, there's a lot of Ethiopic coffee. No, actually, to be honest with you, early on, I had professors like Dr. Glenn Martin, Ed Yamauchi at Miami, knows almost 30 languages. And there was an ethic of, I don't really have hobbies. I help the owners of Hobby Lobby a lot with Museum of the Bible, but the only hobby I have really is reading and writing, and so, so for me, I just enjoy doing it. But here's what happened with this book. I would schedule time a day, like Keith Drury taught me when I was a student, try to write a publishable page a day. Whether you can or you can't, but try to do that under the Lord. And some days you just can't write, so you just research and read. But I would sit in my office, especially during COVID, that really helped to finish this. And I could work on this early in the mornings, and I could work on it late at nights often. So there were some stretches where I'd work all day, but I had to work on other things. I just couldn't do this all day long. And there were days I'd be at my computer in the end, probably, I know one day it was 20 hours almost straight. I'd get up and walk around a little bit. And instead of 10,000 steps, I was getting maybe 1,000, maybe 800. I'd walk around our house. But because it was that much pressure. And so I just had to write other things. So if you look at that list of books, 2 of them are with Harper Collins. They're coloring books on the Bible out of London. That was a nice digression, but one of those books actually has a second edition coming out, I think in a couple of weeks, with the top Jewish scholar, Lawrence Schiffman. The World's Greatest Book's done really well. And so I just enjoy it. And the TV series, it was hard to turn down. And it was actually a lot of fun. Dennis Haysbert from the Allstate commercials is the host. And so anyway, it's exciting stuff. I'm honored to do this. And for all of you watching who are trying to publish articles and books, it took me 10 years to sign my first book. And I just happened to be crisscrossing the country speaking on my research, and a guy came up to me, John Gardner, one of the most famous educators in the United States. He said, I've been looking for this particular research for several years. Would you like to do a book with the University of South Carolina? And I finally got a break, and then started publishing some funny books on growing up poor in Buck Creek. And that kind of opened the doors for really, until God takes me home to write books. And I'm trying to follow how God wants me to choose the books from here on out. But this book here was, it was, and the funds have allowed me actually to give towards, but frankly, student scholarships. So that's where the funds go from this book. So 7 years, it's actually been a joy. It's been a joy working with Johnny.
So you touched on a little bit, but where did you do most of your research and writing on the book?
Well, when COVID hit, almost all of it was in my office. I would go into the Indiana Wesleyan University. I have an office there, and I've been blessed with a nice library. But you can do a lot online. But I travel quite a bit. One particular trip. So I went in Museum of the Bible, by the way, has some copies of early Fox editions.
Wow.
And so we have a lot of things surrounding some of these stories. And we have personal letters from some of those, like the stamps. We have personal letters in the files of the Museum of the Bible from some of the martyrs. It's just amazing. And then, of course, they are very involved with the Elliott family and the end of the spear. And so there's some, but I remember going to Cambridge. A fellow at Tinner House, Cambridge, with Peter Williams, and I went over to the University Library. I just wanted to spend time with the originals. And the original Fox is a squatty book, and then the folios came out. They're huge. I mean, they're so large. You can't imagine carrying them to school or anything. And they lay them out, and you have to have the right things and no pens, and just like the Mr. Bean episode, you can't. They're what, but and I'd been there enough, and so I was working on them for a couple of days. My heart was pretty heavy, it's just like because they had woodcuts, you'd actually see these expressions, people being burned alive, or gunpowders under their arms being blown. It's just gruesome stuff that's happened to good men and women. Jews and Christians, by the way. And so I remember getting a text that Scorsese's film Silence was playing at the theater in Cambridge. And so some of you know about the Japanese persecution movie that he made. And by all the metrics, it bombed. No one really went. And well, when you go, it's a pretty hard movie to watch. And I'll never forget this. I'd been researching a couple straight days just in these original sources and originals, Fox anyway, collecting the ancient stories. And I walked into this theater and it was empty except I think one couple and a family. And the family had a lot of young kids. And there's popcorn wafting, you can smell it wafting through the air. And I think they spilled some and they're giggling. And I look on the screen, and there are Christians being crucified on the tar pits in Japan. And then out of my ear, I can hear kids laughing and the parents sending them out for more candy. And the movie's barely started and they're eating popcorn. And it just about broke me. And the movie was really heavy. And I just thought, what a contrast to the lifestyle that we are in today. And that's why I just so appreciate places like Voice of the Martyrs, Todd Nettleton and the crew. Just you gotta love them. I mean, what they're doing and helping to tell the story.
Yeah. So why this project? Why this book at this time?
Thanks for asking that question. It's a good question. Well, when I had these contracts, and you have to meet the contracts. If you don't meet contracts, you do a lot of work. The book doesn't come out. You don't get paid, and when you get to be as long in the tooth as I am, you're more concerned about the book coming out because it's like birthing a child, and you want to help people with it. It's not really for personal gain. I don't need a resume builder at my age, but when I was asked, it's one of those books, Joel, that as I pray about books when they're offered, it's one of those books I just felt I cannot not write this book. And that's why I did it. Made no sense to sign that contract. But I just realized, I sat there and I looked at this topic and I was reflecting on the meeting we had. And one of the best agents, literary agents in the country, Celia Yates, some of you know John Maxwell, and he's got he started really the agencies for Christian writers anyway. But it was, I cannot not write this. It was with Tyndall House, the largest independent Christian publisher left in the world. They did Tony Dungy's book and others, but that really is where I was at. It was like, okay, Lord, you've honed my skills for such a time as this. And I do hope people find it engaging and inspiring. And it's one of those books that really, to be honest with you, Joel, people will read this. Hopefully it'll be on shelves for many years and they'll forget who wrote it. It doesn't really, be honest, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I could have coached you in this and I think, you could have written it or, a lot of people could have written this book. So it's just a real privilege to write it.
Well, it is an incredible book. I think I texted you when I got this and sent you the picture, and I said, where do I start? And you told me what? You remember what you told me?
Well, first of all, because we know her and knew her, and she was one of my students. Page 467 is a story of Cheryl Beckett. We return to her story later.
Yeah.
But he was killed in Afghanistan, martyred. But I said, read a story in one of the first three sections, whether it's from the time of the disciples forward, and then read a story in the fourth section of the modern martyrs. And so balance that out. And a lot of daily read through the Bibles, you'll read a passage in Genesis, perhaps, and a passage in John, or a passage in the Psalms, and a passage in Revelation. And so that's my recommendation for folks.
Yeah, Cheryl's story, just, yeah, incredible. So you mentioned that. What, as you think about the book, is there one story that sticks out to you the most, or?
Yeah, well, let's start with that one there, because of all the, I've been blessed. I realize that, and I've tried to help. One of the biggest joys is helping faculty members or others publish their first book. So I don't take this lightly at all. But all the books God's blessed me to do, there's 1.25 page that's probably the most meaningful. And it's the story of Cheryl Beckett. So Cheryl, if you come to Indiana Wesleyan's beautiful campus, you're going to see a dorm with her name on it. And you'll see her picture in a couple places. There used to be a big one right outside my door by the John Wesley Honors College. When David Riggs had it outside his office, I'd walk down the hall and salute it. And many times I'm walking through the library, she's got an award and as distinguished alumnus, and I just stop. And in fact, you had mentioned an award that the school gave me, and so that plaque's on the same wall. And so when I walk people through, whether I'm showing them campus or not, Joel, honestly, I'm not trying to be modest or anything here. This is just really the way I feel. I try to stand in front of my picture so they don't see it and point to hers. I mean, that's how sensitive it is. I wish her picture were bigger on that wall than any of the other pictures. Some really great people there. But what happened with her is she went through the biology department. She was actually in my Sunday school class. Andrea Summers introduced me, our dean of chapel here, and was reminding the crowd of her first meeting was in a Sunday school class I was teaching years ago. And Cheryl, she was studying biology, and she really wanted to make a difference on the humanitarian side for struggling populations. And so she ended up in a couple places, went to Afghanistan, and was simply going out to help with a medical team. And they would go over and help both dental and with eye issues with these remote crowds. And they were coming back, and the water had risen, and they couldn't get their jeeps through the water, so they were stopped there. And a group of Taliban came down the hill, saw them, saw a Bible on the dash, and they lined up the 10 medical missionaries, including Cheryl, who was 32 years old, and shot each one of them one at a time. And the only one they didn't kill was the driver, who was quoting the Quran. And that just reverberated around the world. And it was the first of the many slaughters, if you will, the first of this just deluge of atrocities against Christians and also against Jews and Muslims. I mean, some of the sects of Muslims were harshly treated in countries, but here they lined up the Christians and just shot them in cold blood. And so if you go to this account, actually, when I sign this book for people, I always see page 467. And at the end of that, and here's one of the reasons it's so special. So her father is a pastor, Charles Beckett. I called him, used to ask his blessing to write about her and if he would help. And he went into her journals and he was reading through her journals. And he wrote this actually 2 paragraphs. And is it okay if I just read these short paragraphs, Joel?
Please, yes.
Okay. So I say her father, Reverend Charles Beckett, had little doubt about Cheryl's driving faith. After her death, he read her journals and reflected. Quote, she wrote in her journal, which has been a spiritual oasis for me. Over and over again, I read this theme, no longer my own. I've been bought by Christ. With his own blood, I want to know him better. Wow. Can you imagine reading your daughter's words like that in the second paragraph? And then she wrote, quote, I want to die to myself, end quote. And then she asked the question to herself, quote, what does that look like? How do I make that tangible? End of quote. And then he goes on to write, that is what she devoted her life to, knowing him, but knowing him by sacrificially suffering in order to show him. Wow, that's a powerful testimony from a father, and we're blessed to have him on, both the parents on campus to celebrate her life and death.
Can't even imagine. Thank you. Thanks for
I
sharing.
mean, I could read stories the whole time.
Oh,
Catherine, let me share another story. So I said one from the beginning, one from the end. I shared one from the end.
right.
I was studying Catherine, St. Catherine. So we know of her name from St. Catherine's Monastery. So St. Catherine was a very smart, and she's described as beautiful, smart. And martyrs don't have to be smart. They don't have to be beautiful. But she's described it. And sometimes you don't know how true some of this is because they do embellish a lot of these accounts. We try to be honest in this book. This appears in a few different forms. This seems to be embellished, or this is what it says. So trying to let the reader realize that these were their heroes. And well, with St. Catherine, the emperor, I believe, I can't remember if it was Maxentius or Maximilian, but what he did is he wanted to marry her. And she said, I have already married Christ, and I'm devoted to him with my purity. It was Maxentius. And so he called 50 orators, and she debated them. And according to this account, which you don't know how much is embellished here, but she embarrassed them. And many of them converted, and then some of them would visit her in jail when he jailed her because she wouldn't marry him. And then they converted, and then he executed them. So it's kind of an ongoing where this just I don't know why he kept letting people visit her, but eventually he'd had enough. And so he ordered her to be put on what was called the wheel, or we might call it the rack, but there was a wheel what they would do is they would weave your limbs, your arms, your legs through the spokes. And then they would take a big, it says tool on one account, but clubs, if you will, or hammers, sledgehammers, and just smash your bones while the wheel's going around. And according to the account, the wheel broke or it disintegrated, depending on the account you read. And you might read that and you say, that's hard to believe. Well, so is the parting of the Red Sea. Yeah. So is the Immaculate Conception.
Amen.
And so at some point you don't know where the Lord intervened. You don't know where later writers intervened, but we do know in the early accounts, something happened to the wheel that they could no longer do that. So finally, the emperor had enough, so he just beheads her. Now they didn't want to behead martyrs because people would collect their bones and then they would become relics for reliquaries, and people would travel hundreds of miles to see those relics. There was nothing more precious than the bones of a martyr, anything associated with a martyr. And so the wheel became known as Catherine's wheel. And if you go to Oxford, one of the schools, literally it's in their symbol. And so you see the Catherine's wheel. It might be St. Catherine's, but anyway, so it became famous. And then a later story is that the angels came and took her bones and flew them to Mount Sinai. And then another story comes along, and this is where it takes a little more faith to believe what happened, is that some monks were digging at what used to be another name, today is called St. Catherine's Monastery, and found her bones. And oh my goodness, you can imagine the the parades of joy around the Christian world, and it became known as St. Catherine's Monastery. You have a church now named to her, and all these manuscripts, a lot of them, the Museum of the Bible is either purchased or has helped research in that monastery named after that martyr around AD 300. So,
Wow.
it's an interesting story. In one other one, okay? Do I have time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So a lot of times people know of Perpetua and Felicitas. So they know of those martyrs in North Africa. And, the early journal, I mean, she actually kept a journal. She was a wealthy woman who would not recant. And they begged her, slave girl who was pregnant. And her father begged her, and when they were when they started to persecute her in the amphitheater there, which you can still go see today, she literally put her hair up when it fell down because she wanted to die with esteem. It was a sign of courage. It was a sign of class, if you will. And just that story went quite a way. So her own journal, and then someone else who was there finished the story, and then later Tertullian edits it. So he was privy to the information, and so that's probably the best known of the early martyr stories. We have a whole section on women martyrs in the early church, but one that some people overlook actually happened in Lyon, France, during the famous Lyon martyrdoms. It's Blandina. And Blandina, they tied her to a pole, and the wild animals wouldn't touch her. And so they pulled her back out. Says, you're distracting what we're trying to do here. And she talked about how Christ, had either blinded them, or there's different accounts of that. And so then they took her back out after she just would not recant. And they thought watching these gruesome murders would soften her, and she changed her mind. So she goes back out, and they put her in what's called the griddle. It was an iron chair that they put in a fire, like an outdoor roast. And they tried to bake her alive. And it's sometimes you think, I just can't imagine this. Well, yes, you can. There were, Coptic men beheaded on TV not too long ago in orange jumpsuits.
Right.
And I had worked in Egypt, and you can't hide. They take a commitment. They have a tattoo of a cross on their wrist. So people, all they have to do is flip over their wrist, and they're identified by their faith. And so they still do these gruesome things. Well, Blandina, she didn't die. She's, just what a sad sight. Just basically boiled alive, and she lives. So then they had enough. They put her in a basket and threw her on the horns of a bull, and just basically mangled her to death in front of the crowd. And it so appalled some people that it actually won more people to the Lord than they could have ever imagined. And so Tertullian's credit was saying the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. It's a little bit of an edited version of it, but that's basically what it means. The arena, when you look, I don't know if you've been to the Roman Colosseum.
I'm not.
Some people say it's the largest shrine in the world for Christian martyrs. That's probably true. But when you go there, use the headsets they give. I mean, technology's changed, and so I'm not sure if they've updated it in the last couple of years. But when you go through there, listen to that, and talks about it. But one of the things from my graduate years, I remember I was studying arenas in general, and I dug in Isthmia, Greece, where the Panhellenic Games were and everything. And the word arena comes from sand, and they had to use sand in the arenas, because if they didn't, the floors, a lot of those are actually wooden or floors that they actually built. And they had contraptions and doors that would open up, and the animals would spring out. And, it was just all kinds of creativity for bad ends. People worry about AI and the future of AI. I'm telling you, in the Roman Colosseum, what they did with technology, they used it to spruce up the ritual execution of human beings or public entertainment. So it's already been done a few times. I mean, Auschwitz and other places. I mean, technology has been used in horrible ways, but that word literally means sand. And they had to have sand because there was so much blood. It soaked up the blood and kept them from slipping. I mean, it's probably not the only reason they did it, but it's one of the reasons they did that. And that just shows you the depravity of humans throughout history.
Yeah. Speaking of that, how did you handle the really difficult, not that they all aren't difficult, but the tough stories of Christians persecuting other Christians? I mean, that.
Oh man, yeah.
Just,
thinking about this, I kind of hoped you actually wouldn't ask that question.
I'm sorry, we can go on to another question.
It is, well, the book was written because, 1553 to 1558 was the reign of Queen Mary, that we unfortunately have named her Bloody Mary, but that's really not fair because the Protestants killed a lot more than she did. They killed each other in droves. And, the Anabaptists, it's just crazy. And so when you get to that, what we tried to do in the book, actually, Joel, I'm glad you asked that question, is we tried to honor Catholics and Protestants. John Fox treated the Catholics really poorly. Now, there were times both Catholics and Protestants deserved, treatment for what they are. And he says right in his introduction, he didn't want just the heroes to be remembered, but he wanted the perpetrators' names to be remembered in infamy. It wasn't enough just to celebrate the fallen, but he wanted to denigrate for all eternity, if you will, which you could theologically read into that one way or another, what's possible. But those who had taken such brutal actions against men and children, I mean, they filleted people alive, and to think Christians doing these things to other Christians. And so for him, he watched good men and women brutally maimed, tongues cut out, hands and feet cut off, and then put on pikes. And like I said, the gunpowder, and a lot of times they would put gunpowder around their neck, so that, while they were screaming, their body would blow up. And, you see movies, some of this, I don't like to be honest, I don't like to watch any violence on TV. So I think it's unfortunate some things are PG-13 when there's just gruesome violence. And, I went to see Corrie ten Boom speak in Indianapolis many years ago, and she said that our greatest defense against sin is being sensitive to sin itself. And she said, when you no longer are sensitive, then we've lost, our defenses. And so as I read these passages, what Johnny Moore and I decided to do was to say, look, there were mistakes made on both sides. Many of these people, when you really read about them, they had heartfelt beliefs. If you've seen A Man for All Seasons about Sir Thomas More, I mean, devout Catholic, I mean, he played a big role in history. I mean, and so, whether you believe in, his notions in utopia or whatever, is Thomas More, when he was asked by his friends, he said, all you have to do is just recant, and you can go on and you can go to the parties with us, and you can enjoy life, and you've been, given such a brain and such a constitution, and it's just a small thing, and you can go on and enjoy. And he looks at them and he said, when I stand before the judgment throne and I'm doomed to hell for not living what I knew was right and what I believed in, will you then join me at that party in eternity in hell forever? That's how he ended that discussion. So he shouldn't have been put to death. Cranmer, others, they shouldn't have been put to death, but they were. And each one of them they went to death. Sometimes they recanted, and then like Kramer, he puts his hand in the flame as he's burning.
Yep.
And he said, "This has offended me because I've waffled." And he said, and so as he's dying, he actually puts his hand in and lets his hand burn off as he, before he actually dies. And so as you look at that, all you can say is that even with some of the most unjust things that you could imagine, they knew that the core of the biblical story was true, and that Jesus Christ and the cross had changed the world forever. And they would not in any way give up that faith, no matter who was persecuting them.
Amen. Well, you mentioned Johnny. How did that writing process work between the two of you? Just curious as to how that.
Well, it was a long one, and there were a lot of lonely times where, so he originally got the contract after rescuing all those persecuted Christians. I mean, Johnny and his team saved about 30-some thousand people. I mean, he was only in his early 30s and had raised some money. And, he was a COO, I think, of Liberty University. He was 26 years old. I mean, he's just amazing guy. And to think, he was in Indiana Wesleyan's campus for the book launch with me and Todd Enel. It was a neat time. The Remnant Trust was there with those boxes, Book of Martyrs. But for Johnny, we knew each other through a lot of different events. We have mutual friends. Tim Dowrup, the president of Christianity Today. Johnny and I were friends. They're a lot younger. Maybe they look at me as some kind of wacko uncle, that looks like, my hair gets all, I don't really comb my hair. And so, I don't know, maybe I was just kind of a conversation piece early on, but we became friends through, part of what I've done is in journalism. And I met Tim, 20 years ago, and he was really young. Tim's really bright. Degrees from, I think, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, just these guys are solid Christians. And they're also ironic. They have that spirit about them that says, look, I might disagree with you, but I like, like Aquinas's virtues, the intellectual humility, they treat people like they might have something that is of value. So they listen. And if you follow what's happening at Christianity Today, I'm privileged to be on the board there. We just came from our board meeting a couple of days ago in Colorado Springs. All the metrics are up, and so whether you agree or disagree with each of the writers or Russell Moore on his position in politics, these guys they love the Lord deeply, these men and women, and they're great writers and great thinkers. And we go back a long way in journalism and good causes. And I reached out to Tim when the Green family asked me 12 years ago to start the museum with them. It's just me, them, and one other person, and Lauren McAfee, their daughter. And so I reached out to people smarter than I, like Tim Dalrymple, and ask him to help me with content. And there's, I think, 8 books right here, part of a major curriculum that all the schools in Israel and other places used. And Tim helped me write all that and research it, and just, it was a real joy. And as I got in that project, I realized his good friend's Johnny, and so the circle got pretty small. So.
Well, I was at that book launch, and I also remember Johnny saying this book would not have happened if it weren't for Jerry Pattengale. So
he's very kind. He's very kind. It's been a joy, and because it was so different and methodical. One of the things I learned with Ed Yamauchi, if you've not read his work, Stones of Scriptures, Harper's World, the New Testament. He's got I helped him with a book not too long ago on the Dictionary of Biblical Customs and Manners in Late Antiquity with Hendrickson's Press. And so, but what he does, so I kind of bring the two together. If you've read my humorous books, the Buck Creek series, you see these funny stories and these lead sentences. And in a book like this, it's like Yamauchi, where it's more of chronicling. It's like trying to get through and have a methodology and a pattern. And so it was kind of a nice blend of that. And, a lot of people say, I just can't publish a book. And I'll say, well, remember, in order to get a bite, you have to have a line in the water. And so I always like to be working on projects and and having them out before publishers. I don't make all my deadlines, but I make most of them, and I try. And sometimes, I went all the way over to, I won't tell you the press. It's one of the biggest presses in the country, dailies, a daily newspaper.
Mhm.
So they sent me to London to do an article, and I got over there and researched it and found out that the person they wanted me to research was actually a strong person of faith and really hadn't done something sinister. And so I kind of wrote a glowing article on this person, and they turned it down. They wanted me to go over there. I mean, it was kind of a heady thing, I'm over here for this particular. And then they said, Jerry, it needs to be saucier. I said, well, it's not. I mean, this person's taken it on the chin, and she's actually a pretty wonderful person. And I said, what you wanted me to write about took place a long time ago, and so I didn't write it. And and so in this process, we talk about people getting together, and you have to realize that you don't ever want to write something just to get it in print and get it in front of people. And sometimes it means hearing no. That did publish somewhere else, but and that publishing venue came back and asked me to do another piece for them later. But yeah, that's hard. The hardest thing here, I don't know. You asked me how long it took. I don't know if I mentioned how long this was when it was submitted. So
no.
270,000 words.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, 270,000 words. So basically, it's still a big book, 624 total pages. Basically, what they did is they cut a year of my life. It's on their editing room floors. And finally we got to the place, and the hard part for me, Joel, and for all of you out there, the hard part for me wasn't that another page of my writing. I mean, God's will, I don't need more stuff in print. I want stuff that makes a difference in print, and we'd all like to have one To Kill a Mockingbird book. I mean, who wouldn't want that? Right. But in this scenario, I felt like I don't know if you've seen Schindler's List, but at the end, when Liam Neeson he's holding up pens and he goes, I could have sold this and saved another person, or I could have sold that car and saved 20 people. Yeah. And although it's not as drastic as that, it's drastic as remembering, and every page that was cut was a story of someone who wasn't going to be in this book. Now they're in maybe other books, in the modern Martyrs, maybe not. But every one that was cut was so hard on me. Finally, the editors, Caleb, John Farrar, and Ron Beers, Jeff Johnson, just a great group of people. They said, can we ask you to do this? Can you sit down, cup of coffee, and just read through what we left in? Don't think about what's been cut.
Right.
Think about what's left. I think there's 70 or 80 pages of footnotes left. They probably cut 50 pages of footnotes alone. And if you research for that, it really hurts. They probably, I don't know, 200 pages of text, 300. I really don't know how many. And I sat down and I read through it, and I found myself, some of these stories I wrote quite a long time ago, and I've been editing, and you get a little too close to it. I started crying again. And I sat back when I finished, Joel. And Joel, you have a really tender heart. If you were here with me, we'd probably be crying side by side, when this happened. I get teary-eyed, think about it.
Yeah.
And I read about what happened to these people in the name of Christ. Whether it's a hatchet in the chest of a famous missionary who had learned 20 languages. And he got off after someone from Europe had mistreated them and they mistook him for one of them. Whatever the story is, the stories that were left in, this was the choice of the editing team in Chicago. I sat, and when I closed the book, I said, it tells the story. If it told the whole story, it'd be 20, 30, 40 volumes. And did we tell it the best? We told it, I guess, the best in the time we had with the skills we had. And I told the crowd this, by the way, the other day. There were times that, we all have things that we could have done better. We all, I only cheated in one test in my whole life, and I went back in. It was Wilbur Williams, and I overheard someone say the right answer. It was and I remember I knew it wasn't A, I knew it wasn't D, these King's test, and I wanted to get a perfect. And I went back in and I said, well, I know it's not A and D, and I heard these people say it's C, so I wrote C. And then I went back in, and I thought he was God anyway. And I remember I took my test back, and I said, I can't put that answer down as cheating, and I told Dr. Williams, said, what would you put? And I said, I was going to put D. And he said, well, put it down. I mean, and it ended up being B, it was like I would have cheated and got it wrong anyway. But we all have done things, whether it's minor like that or it's major another way, or we've all done things that we reach out to God and ask Him to forgive us for those things. And as I read this book again, I know that there's testimony after testimony of these people who went through this serious persecution. Mm-hmm. And their years, like Richard Wurmbrand. I mean, oh my goodness, you need to go watch a video of him, Tortured for Christ. I think all my generation, we read that book. It's like, they buried him for 3 straight years, 12 feet underground. Mm-hmm. And the Romanian soldiers above him had felt on the bottom of their shoes so he wouldn't even hear the sound of them walking. 3 years. And you know what he said, for a while you start thinking of those sins, and then you start thinking of, sins that, is it really a sin? Like one of his pastor friends, he said he kept thinking of the story of, he was so exhausted after preaching to this large crowd that this young boy says, may I talk to you? And he said, I can't, I'm just exhausted. And then a week later that city was bombed and that boy died, I think it's what he said. And he thought, so the whole time he's in this underground cell, he was thinking, what if I had told him? Would he be in heaven today? And so for him, he had to relive that for years underground, that was, no, it's not stealing a loaf of bread, but it's not being obedient to God and not being sensitive to someone's soul's on the line. And as you read these stories of struggle with these Christians that are facing what they believe to be imminent death, and they're struggling with these things, and yet they stayed true as hard as it was. And that's you want to capture as much as you can, and the realness of it. Some of it's so gory that we try, sometimes we just said, here's what it says in the past. But so I know that these people who are persecuted, they think of things that were wrong in their lives, and yet they lived at least to help us with that. One story comes to mind here. We are privileged. We just closed the exhibit at the Museum of the Bible in DC of Watchman Nee. And I had the privilege of spending time with his cellmate for 9 years. Wow. Mr. Wu. Mr. Wu is a little fiery man, and he spent 9 years, and he got saved because of Watchman Nee's witness in prison. Wow. And he was shifted, so they were together and then they were apart because Watchman Nee was in for double that time. And at the end of Wu's time, he was put back in a cell with Watchman Nee, and then I think if I have the story right, the next day, Watchman Nee died. And before he died, though, he gave Mr. Wu what became the only artifact from a martyr ever to surface after a martyr had been put to death in China. It was his pen. He gave that to Mr. Wu, and Mr. Wu held that up and he handed it to the Museum of the Bible so that it could be displayed for people, at least, if you will, have a relic. When you think of all the things that Watchman Nee wrote in his testimony, and he could have gotten out at any time. They offered him many chances simply to have an easy out and cooperate with a communist version of the church, and he just didn't do that. And so for me, it's sort of like, being with one of the apostolic fathers who was with John. It's like being with, it's like being with Polycarp or Ignatius, or who's close to one of the disciples.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there having coffee and a sandwich with him, and they're in the hotel or in the museum, just thinking, oh my goodness, what, there's so many things that people might do for pleasure, but for me, there was no bigger joy than that. It was just,
Wow.
it was power. Or here, Anne Graham Lotz. Oh my goodness. Anne Graham Lotz, actually, the Triangle has an article on Anne Graham Lotz speaking to Ukraine.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah.
she, I was in the back room with her praying. And I mean, she was bringing fire from heaven down in the green room before she went out before these hundreds of people at the museum. And you can go on, but she shared the prayer she prayed for the women of Ukraine. And you know what she asked, Joel? She said, where are they now? Where are they now? Because when you see that picture in the Triangle, her ministry sent it to us. There's a lot of women waving hankies, and if you were waving a hanky, that means that you accepted Christ. And with the bombing coming, she said, where are they now? And I just came here for a meeting with Michael Brown, who went over trying to help the Ukrainians. He's been there for 3 months, and he teaches for IW, and he spent 3 months of his own time and his own money to go help. And that's what Christ is calling us to do. It's to give people hope and to point them to him. Amen.
Amen. So, Jerry, if you had one thing you wanted people to take away from this book, I know that's a tough question, or multiple things. What would that be that you would hope they would take away?
I would hope that as they see the scriptures that these martyrs held on to, that's the convicting power. God's given me ability to memorize, and that's the lowest level of intelligence. You can memorize, all the names of the trees, or, I did the Jerry Lucas thing, memorizing large crowds. Yeah. And you can do that. That's the lowest level of memory. And yet, when I read these accounts, I feel convicted that if I were underground for 3 years with no light, could I remember enough scripture for the days? And you know what Wurmbrand did? He remembered 350 sermons that he preached in the text and preached them in his mind. And I was just so convicted of that. It's like, wow, and so for me, I would hope as you go through the stories, if there's a scripture or if there's a principle that applies to your life. We have in the book cultural connections. What's something today that you see that actually is connected? I talked to you about the Catherine's Wheel, but they're throughout the book. We give snippets of how that particular story has a connection to the present, and be thankful for that. And we don't know what's ahead. I mean, we're in tough times. If you read the Christianity Today piece I have in the April edition on the books you need to read about persecution, so I chose Todd Nettleton's 40 Days with Persecuted, and those stories, they're uplifting. And so I would say take away, look for something to be inspired by or engaged, look for scriptures and cultural connections to today, and look for other voices, look for other things. And I recommend Virginia Prada's book, Proden's book, Saving My Assassin. Phenomenal book. And it's a true story. I fortunate to be with her. She's 4'9", 4'10", and she brought down the Romanian government. They were going to kill her. They sent an assassin, and the assassin's got his gun to her head, and she led him to the Lord.
Oh my God!
Wow. And fast, I'm running the book for you. You really should read her book. Yeah. And she spoke for Women of Legacy. Jackie Green has that at the Museum of the Bible. And so I was reading this book, and at the end of the book, that assassin 20 years later or so shows up at her legal office in the United States.
Oh my God.
From Romania.
Wow.
He somehow walked away, and they thought that he had killed her. They didn't know that he didn't kill her. I mean, there was a car crash and they were distracted. And somehow he got out of the country, and he went and found her office and got saved. And now is in the ministry. I mean, just a powerful story. And the third book is Johnny. I recommended Johnny Moore's The Oath of the Martyrs, and because it's something he found when he was visiting and interviewing survivors from these families in all these countries. It was this common oath that they held in one ceremony. It was used, and books that aren't on the list. David Jeremiah has a book about how to get ready for persecution. Erwin Lutzer's a good friend of mine, and we've done a lot together with Moody Property in Massachusetts. And he has a book, Hitler's Cross, and there's a chapter there about getting ready for the future. And I mean, I would highly recommend that. And so those books didn't make it into that article, but I would recommend you look for sources that can inspire you. So
thank you for that. So what's your next project, or maybe you're already in the middle of your next project, or 7 to 10?
My grandkids are coming, and our grandkids have memorized a lot of scripture in Spanish and English.
Wow.
And they're between the 3-year-old just a little bit through 11. One of them, Malachi, I'm bragging on him, memorized so many scriptures. I mean, I could take this and show you where he stood on the ottoman in the other room. He quoted so many scriptures at Easter, we had to stop him.
Oh my goodness.
That's how many. And his parents went through Indiana Wesleyan University. And so there's hope for our future. I mean, Malachi and Titus and Ezra and Ezek are those kids. And then we have 2 grandchildren coming from Alaska down who also were, their parents are both believers, and through IWU. And Island Everett will be down with us. So that's my next project. Book-wise, we have a book, Todd Ream and I have I think our 7th book together coming out in the fall. Okay. It's called The Anxious Middle, The Future of the Christian College. And we use Bonhoeffer, talking about great martyr stories. So we use Bonhoeffer's creation in the fall, how he looks at the beginning of Genesis, and we take 4 principles from that. Basically say you need to have colleges built around this discipleship model, because regardless of what else you're doing, these Christian schools need to be distinct, and you need to be collaborating, and you need to have aspirational goals. And so that book comes out in the fall. Like I said, the world's greatest book comes out. And then I have several books coming out with the museum in the near future. And then I signed a book with Jacqueline Vera Iloff, who is Joel Osteen's sister-in-law, and it's the Women in Jesus' Life. So that's been we signed that quite some time ago. So that's one of those that's I need to push, to be honest with you, to the forefront. And so those are all exciting. I have been asked to write some national articles. I'm a little late on those because, quite frankly, I couldn't pull the trigger. When you push send on those articles, it doesn't mean you can't retract them, but you want to make sure the opening line of an article I've been working on, to be honest, on Christian colleges for the national press, and I'm giving away the piece here, but the opening line is, if you ride the fence too long, everyone gets irritated. And yes, it'll be an article that brags on the Indiana Wesleyans and Taylor universities and other great schools that have I think have really stayed the course. So so do the best we do, and I appreciate your prayers. I see myself as a mediocre writer that God has somehow instilled within me a tenacity to find an angle and to find the right audience. And so I'm thankful for that, so just can't complain at all. And I'm excited. And I do hope you get this book and that you have your churches and everyone get it. My proceeds are going to help students. So it's not making me rich at all. So, yeah.
Well, Jerry, I can't thank you enough for your time. Thank you for carving out an hour of your day to spend with us and to share this information, and for this incredible book that you've written, the new book of Christian Martyrs. I got it on Amazon. Get it today. You will not.
I would have given you a copy, Joel, so
Well, I know, but
yeah, I think those are all given out at the book launch. So
yeah.
all you listening, thanks for it's an honor to be involved in this. So thanks so much, whether you're watching this overseas or here.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time, Jerry. Thank you. Thank you for those of you who are watching now and who will watch the recording. So thankful for that. Thank you for Wesley Seminary for sponsoring this event, for Indiana Wesleyan University for this joint project. And again, if you have questions about seminary, give us a call, 877-673-0009. And we just hope you have a great rest of your day. And remember, we are Wesley and you belong here. Blessings. Thank you, Doc.
Yes, you bet.